Good evening and welcome. I would like to call the December 12th, 2023 Planning Commission regular meeting to order. The Planning Commission is holding hybrid meetings. Members of the public can attend the meeting in person or observe the meeting on Zoom online by visiting www.cityofarcata.org and following the live meetings link at the bottom of the city's homepage or on the city's YouTube channel. If you are attending remotely, please be aware that the Zoom feed provides the closest to real-time stream. If you rely on the other feeds and you wish to make comments, please be aware of the time lag on those feeds. The first item on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. The City of Arcata acknowledges that the lands we are located on are the unceded ancestral lands of the Wiyot tribe. The land that Arcata rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Gudene, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The City of Arcata acknowledges the Wiyot community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement seeks to aid in dismantling the legacy narratives of settler colonialism. Next is roll call. Staff, will you please call roll?
Yeah, Commissioner Strickland.
Present.
Commissioner Simmons. Here. Commissioner Mayer.
Here.
Commissioner Yodowitz.
Here.
Commissioner Lehman.
Here.
Vice Chair Tagney.
Here.
And Chair Davies.
Here. We are joined on the staff end this evening by Community Development Director David Loya, and also I think Deputy Director Jennifer Dart is going to be joining us. Next, we have public comment. During this time, people may make comments about items that are not on the agenda. If you wish to speak on one of our agenda items, you will have an opportunity when we are discussing those items. If you have comments about items that are not listed on our agenda today, please line up now behind the lectern. If you are on Zoom and you wish to make comments on matters that are not on today's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen or by pressing *9 if you're calling in. The clerk will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. With that, I'd like to open public comment. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to comment during early oral communications. Feel free to state your name for the record. May we have the first speaker, please?
Hello, my name is Cody Freitas. I'm with the Operating Engineers. I just came to speak in general support of the Gateway Housing projects and just reiterate the fact that being proactive and getting in front of the housing crisis that is going on, getting jobs for local residents, and doing what we can to stay ahead of everything that can go wrong and can go on with a process like this. And the sooner we can get the ball rolling on this project, the sooner we can start expediting the grant applications, getting permits going, the easier everything will be. And we just really want to see that the unhoused population have options in this area. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments very much.
Good evening, I'm Fred Wise. I see we have a process and timeline here. I hope it goes out to the local coastal program and how that fits in with this. On the City of Arcata website, it says that that'll be submitted for approval. A draft will be submitted for approval in September. There's some new articles and features on arcata1.com, including there's an inclusionary housing searchable database that UC Davis put out. You can look up 150 cities and counties on it. You can look up a particular city, click on it, and show what kind of inclusionary housing they have. I also have on Arcata One a list of the top 100 of them. They include 20% inclusionary zoning, 15% inclusionary zoning for different time spans. One thing has come up in the state density bonus law, which we've all been talking about. It applies not just to affordable housing, but also to senior housing and student housing. In fact, if 20% of the building is student housing for low-income students. The state density bonus law kicks in. Would like to see a presentation about this. There's more on arcata1.com, but there's also more in the subtleties of that, as we are well aware. We had their vision statement at our kind of poorly noticed study session, and there's missing in the list of people that we include in Arcata were age and disabilities. I think they were being added. I look forward to seeing a draft of that so we can comment on that further. But it doesn't include housing. As you know, there's a new draft of the Gateway Area Plan. It came out on Friday. It has an unusual situation. The first draft came, of course, from Plan West. But ever since then, your drafts have come from input from yourselves and the committees. This draft differs in that it has proposed changes that haven't yet come from you. The cover says that the version includes proposed changes reviewed by the Planning Commission on December 12th, but this came out on December 8th before you actually made your proposed changes. People sometimes ask me why I'm a stickler for words. It's because words is what we have. We have these documents are composed of words, some numbers, some figures, but words. And as we all know, words make a difference. There's a simple one of shall versus may, but there's lots of subtleties, as we'll get into later when we talk about the policies that are going to go over to the general plan. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments, Fred. Do we have anyone waiting to speak online? Negative. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's comments, as always, and appreciate the participation and input. Now, moving on to item 3 is our consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the commission and are enacted in one motion. Commissioners or members of the public can request that an item be removed for separate discussion. The only item on our consent calendar is item A, approve Planning Commission minutes for our regular meeting, November 14th, 2023. Do any planning commissioners wish to pull the consent item, or does anyone else wish to pull this item? Not seeing anyone who wishes to pull this item, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We have no public hearings this evening, so we'll move on to business items. We have 2 business items this evening, and we will start with business item A, consider a recommendation to the City Council on the general plan updates. And tonight we have topics under this agenda item that are based on direction from the City Council. And in addition, I am aware that Commissioner Lehman has a topic he would like to raise. Because the agenda topics were specifically requested by the council and because there is a body of work that has been held over for multiple meetings, I'm going to have us work on the items that are listed in the staff report first. But I plan to reserve time at the end for Commissioner Lehman's topic, which also relates to general plan amendments. Can we please begin with the staff report?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll start by introducing the first topic, and we'll take each topic up under this agenda item separately. But before I get to the first topic, I did want to give an update on the process and timeline. I do apologize that this image is pretty washed out, but I'll give you the verbal summary and kind of point at the dates here. So on the top, we have the process for the environmental impact report that is going to be certified before we take any of these actions on the general plan. It's to evaluate the impact of those general plan changes. We're here in December of 2023. We're just finishing up our legal review of the admin draft EIR, and staff is beginning to make those changes That will take us through January, early January, at which point we'll turn over that admin draft to our consultant, GHD, who's working on the EIR, and they'll be producing by the end of January the circulation-ready draft EIR. And so our intent is to start the 45-day circulation at the end of January, beginning of February. Down on the bottom here, you see some hearing dates, important hearing dates. Today is an important hearing date because you are finalizing some recommendations on the general plan that were directed from council. And we have, in addition, on here, I wanted to indicate that the Planning Commission and the City Council, for that matter, can continue their review of the general plan and the form-based code, starting in your meetings in February. But because we are going to be releasing the EIR at the end of January, it's important for us to have a stable project description, basically a complete set of what is being evaluated and analyzed in the EIR. We will have the fully compiled set of all of the general plan elements and the form-based code in its complete draft form by your meeting in January, January 9. And so I'm inserting a milestone here, the PC review full general plan at that time. Again, because of the EIR timeline and the importance of having a stable project description at that point, those documents will reflect all of the discussions that have been made up until that time. And that will reflect, the EIR will reflect those changes. Now, going back to this earlier bullet where we start the Planning Commission continued general plan and form-based code review, just because we have a, stable project description in January doesn't mean that you can't continue a review and continue to consider for your final and formal recommendation to the City Council any changes that you think need to be made. If you do come up with changes, if we don't complete the work tonight and the full general plan that's produced in January doesn't complete all of the changes that you might wish to make, you'll still be able to make those recommended changes out into February, March, April. So that's important to understand. Overlapping with this 45-day period, I'm going to jump ahead in the timeline here. So here's the 45-day circulation period going through mid-March. We're also going to start drafting the final EIR in March. And so what happens during circulation is that the public will provide public comment on the draft circulated EIR. And the final EIR, it's a bit of a misnomer because it's not like we rewrite the draft again and make changes to that draft per se. What the final EIR contains is the full list of comments that we received during the circulation period, the city's responses to those comments, and then any modifications to sections of the document. So you might see a section of, let's say, the greenhouse gas section of the EIR where maybe we needed to clarify something, make it a little bit clearer. The public comment informed us that it wasn't as succinct as it should be, or didn't specify something that was intended to be specified. Those kinds of changes can be made in the final EIR, and they get reflected in that final EIR without having to recirculate the document, without having to start the process over again. So we'll be working on that draft final EIR, and the intent is that by the beginning of May, that process will be complete. Middle of March to the beginning of May, we will complete our draft final EIR. Again, the Planning Commission can have meetings during that entire time frame and choose to discuss any topic on the general plan at that point. But you'll start having formal hearings on EIR approval and the approval of the general plan, the form-based code, starting in May. And here, this is an abbreviated timeline. It doesn't leave a whole lot of meetings for the Planning Commission, City Council review. This is really, you're in the driver's seat. When you make these decisions, the City Council's in the driver's seat when they want to hear a recommendation from you. But I've, compressed this timeline just to show that it can be done by about the beginning of June, first meetings in June. So that's our current working timeline. It's a little bit past the intended April deadline that we had previously, but that was unavoidable due to productions of the, these admin drafts. And so that this is our current working timeline. Just want to pause and ask, are there any quick questions on the timeline?
I understand that you're going to ask us to make a final recommendation on the draft to the council this evening. And I am wondering how we can responsibly do that without having seen a full draft altogether with the recommended changes, so we understand what the document is that we would be moving forward. I understand that that may be available for our January 9th meeting, and so it seems that it would behoove us to wait until we can actually read the draft plan as a whole before making that recommendation, which we could address on January 9th, while staff can continue to do the work that you've described between now and then. I think we could probably still make the rest of the timeline if we were to do that, but it would allow us to act responsibly in addressing a document that we've actually seen.
Okay. Oh, I forgot a couple of others.
So my question is, would anyone die if we waited until January 9th?
Would anyone die? No, I don't think so. It would have implications if you were asking, can staff not, make these changes, not call that the stable project description, excuse me. It would certainly have implications for the timeline that I've laid out here. It would add at least a couple of months to it. So my intent is to take the work that we've done to date, recognizing that dropping a policy in, the circulation element versus dropping it in the design element versus the land use element is not going to result in an impact on the environment or a change to the analysis of the impact on the environment. Changing those figures around before we circulate the document is going to result in redoing the entire EIR, identifying, all the places where those policies are mentioned, and moving them to the appropriate place based on some new updated guidance from the Planning Commission. It would mean changing all of the documents themselves, the general plan documents themselves. And so all of these add time to the circulation process, but doesn't buy any additional clarity. And so certainly if the majority of the Planning Commission said, hey, we're willing to, put that timeline off and add a few more months to this, we would take that direction to City Council, make sure that they confer, that they confirm that that is the policy direction as well. And we'd be able to do that before your January 9th meeting. So it's up to you all. If that's the direction you want to provide to staff, we will take that recommendation up to the City Council.
Does anyone else have any questions? A comment? Go ahead.
I'll just say, I feel like we have seen the draft, right, in lots of different forums, and we're just making a few sort of end-of-the-road changes to it. I also think that, with the need for this project, the idea of delaying it that much really does not appeal to me at all. And so I would urge the rest of the Planning Commission not to take that route.
I think too, after the discussion tonight, you'll see what, with more clarity, what the proposed minor changes are that are left to make. So that might inform that.
Point of clarity. Are we talking about the policy mapping, Section A, mostly right now, particularly? Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I wanted to give a little bit of context for the decisions that you're making tonight. We're going to be talking first about the gateway policy transition. Again, the objective is to recommend which policies stay in the gateway area plan, which ones are to be moved into the general plan to apply both in the gateway area and to other areas in the city, and which are to be deleted. And there are several reasons why you may wish to delete them. We put these recommendations together in attachment A to your staff report tonight, and we'll go over that in a little bit of detail just to orient to that as well. But again, I want to emphasize that this is the main objective here. You know, my hope is that we can stay focused on that decision tree as opposed to getting bogged down into language, but there are a couple of places where that may be necessary. So for context, I wanted to bring forward this graphic that comes out of the Gateway Area Plan. This graphic helps us to understand the relationship between the Gateway Area Plan, which is shown in green here, and the general plan, which is shown in brown. So the body of policy of this, completely overlapping Venn diagram shows that all of the general plan policy applies citywide, and it applies to the extent that it's not overridden or that it's just simply not applicable because it doesn't have that resource in the gateway area. By contrast, the policies in the gateway area only apply in the gateway area. They cannot be used outside of the gateway area. And so if we want to move policies out of the gateway area plan and move them into the general plan so that they could be used and are applicable in other areas of the city, maybe other infill opportunity zones, for example, then we have to think carefully about what that means in terms of the land use designations and the zoning related to the gateway area. This is an excerpt from the attachment A. It shows that there are several policies that are proposed to fold into the land use. And you don't need to read this at this level. This is just to, point out that by moving all of the policies that are recommended either into the land use, or somewhere else, they still need to apply in the general plan. In the gateway area plan. So the question is, how do you get that to happen, right? If I move a policy from the general plan and I put it into a general area within the, from the gateway plan and I move it into a general area in the general plan, it still applies in the gateway area. But something specific like land use, I have to land on something more specific. And so what staff is recommending in the staff report and in the changes that we made is that we use an overlay zone. Overlay zones function to add specificity in a general area. I like this image because it shows this overlay zone literally floating above the underlying zoning here. And so you'll see R1 is the yellow, orange is R2, we've got some pink C1 and some purple L1, so commercial and probably like an industrial district here. All of those are overlain by this WP zone, the wellhead protection overlay. This is just excerpt from somebody else's document. This has nothing to do with us. But I like this image because it shows how you can have one overlay zone cover several different underlying zoning districts. And so that's what we're proposing for the gateway. We already have overlay zones. We call them combining zones in our land use code for a whole host of different things. Historic landmarks, the plaza area has one, we have wetland protections, all kinds of reasons why we will want to take any type of underlying base zoning, or what we call primary zoning in our land use code, and overlay it with special considerations for that particular district. Now, I'm not going to read you the purpose here, but if you read the purpose under section 9.28.010, I think you'll find that these purposes match well with what we're trying to do here, to have a gateway area that has special zoning standards that we would apply through the form-based code, and they would be identified in the gateway area plan as the land use designations that would tie to these overlay zones. Okay, so we're proposing that the gateway zoning becomes combining zones, but then that begs the question, well, what base zone applies in the gateway area? Well, we have residential low, residential high, ag, we have commercial central, commercial mixed. I would offer that, commercial mixed makes the most sense for the types of land uses we've envisioned in the gateway area. And so what the proposal is to have a modification, and this isn't shown in track changes in the revised Gateway Area Plan that I produced, but this is the sentence that was added to that document under the Gateway Zoning Code to explain this. The Gateway Zoning Code, or Gateway Code, describes a highly detailed set of standards for the gateway combining zones. So that's where we drop in that this is going to be related to the general plan through combining zones. The underlying base zoning, or the primary zoning in the gateway area, is commercial mixed use. And then it tells you can read more on that land use designation by looking into the general plan. So this is a way that we can take standards that are specific to the gateway area and drop them or tie them to the commercial mixed use, specifically through the combining zone of the gateway land use designations. Does that make sense to folks? Are there kind of questions about how the underlying base zoning relates to the overlaying combining zone in this proposal?
It's me again. And I confess, David and I talked about this on the phone this afternoon. So I understand the attractiveness of designating all of the future infill opportunity zones in a single way in order to make it clear that they're all part of the same policy program, if you will. I feel that an overlay zone, the way you're proposing it, it is actually potentially misleading. A couple of things. It requires that you designate a base zone, in this case, proposing it as commercial mixed use is actually kind of misleading, considering the original intention of the GAP, which was to promote housing development on underutilized, largely formerly industrial sites, which may not actually be the same purpose that other infill opportunity zones have. And the other thing it does, by doing this as an overlay zone and then having other gateway zones underneath that, it adds another fairly opaque level to this onion of zoning that we've already created. Other cities do it differently. One example that comes to mind are the neighborhood-specific zones that the city of San Francisco has adopted and has used really effectively and transparently for years for Chinatown and the South of Market area, maintaining their distinctive design features and policy orientations. They haven't added another layer to this already complicated zoning onion, which is what this kind of 2 layers of zoning would do. And so I kind of like to retain the idea that we've been having all along, that there's going to be a gateway-specific form-based code, and we'll call it the Gateway Code. And I don't know that designating the entire area as commercial mixed use really accomplishes what we've been seeking with this plan, in a way that simply leaving it as the Gateway Code would do, and designating those areas with gateway-specific zoning designations. I think that's what we've been thinking all along. That's how staff has presented it to us. That's how the consultants have presented it to us. This is the first mention we've had of a combining zone, and the first mention we've heard of it being a commercial mixed-use combining zone. I think we should step back and go back to what we and the public have been thinking about all along. Recognizing that if we have other infill opportunity zones, they may have their own form-based codes as well, without adding a whole new layer that will be opaque to the public. So I am not super enthusiastic about either the PD, the overlay zone idea, but especially not about designating the entire area as commercial mixed use.
I think our IT person is on top of that. Our IT person is on top of it.
May I ask a question?
Questions? Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Point of clarity. Can I be reminded by staff or whoever, is there anywhere in the gateway zoning that we've discussed so far that excludes commercial?
No, in fact, okay, so a couple points of clarification. First, what I'm presenting here, it would be good to get through with clarifying questions. We're kind of entering into deliberations a little bit, and kind of compartmentalizing the deliberations before you've seen the full proposal is probably going to be a little bit challenging to track. But absolutely not. The gateway has always been envisioned as a mixed use, mixed income, mixed occupancy, area. And we've talked about both in the gateway area, but also we've had discussions about in the commercial mixed use, disconnecting the requirement for a commercial component, recognizing that requirement for commercial is in and of itself one of the things that kills many projects. When you have vacancies in your downtown and you're near downtown, and then you tell someone, well, you have to build more commercial if you want to build this housing, we're just not getting the housing. And so we haven't fully deliberated on that change in the commercial mixed use, but we have had that conversation as the Planning Commission body. So I do think it's very appropriate to designate the underlying zoning commercial mixed use for this purpose, in particular, given the direction from council to move policy from the gateway into the general plan. This is a way, by doing this combining zone, this is a way to connect those policies still specifically to the gateway area. And I did want to clarify that no one is suggesting that we not have a gateway code. The form-based code is still part of the proposal. It's still retained in this, the way that this is envisioned. It would just be treated more like a combining zone as opposed to a base zoning district. And that's really not that complicated.
Go ahead, Peter.
Judith, are you saying that we should have different form-based codes for different parts of Arcata? Because, let me finish. It seems to me the form-based code, it's very complex, and building it was a difficult task. And it seems to me we can use it citywide, and it would be onerous to have specific form-based codes for different neighborhoods.
Joel, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to ask David, assuming Judith's proposal of having specific zoning districts for each of the opportunity zones, including Gateway, which I think is what she was saying, in lieu of the combining zone, what are the disadvantages of that?
Just, I guess, in brief, the disadvantage is that you would have the same policy in multiple places. The conversation that we had with the council on the 28th kind of boiled down to, if you recall, we talked a little bit about the history of the Gateway Area Plan, how it started off as sort of a single effort, solitary effort. And as time progressed, as we went through the planning work for the housing element, we said, hey, why don't we apply some of these in different areas? So we created 4 infill opportunity zones. And to clarify, the idea was that, at least some of those might have their own form-based codes. And as the council has been working through their discussions and hearing from the public about, some of the policy that is in the Gateway area, and there have been several comments, commissioners, public members, city council members who have said, these I think are great policies and should be applied citywide. And so that's how we got to where we are today. If you said, look, no, we want to keep everything that's in attachment A in the Gateway area plan just like it is, that would mean that any of those policies that you want to also use in, the Valley West infill opportunity zone, or if you wanted to use some of those in, commercial mixed use in Sunnybray, or if you wanted to apply some of that to the Craftsman's Mall, then these policies that are guiding that direction would have to be in each area where you're adopting these policies separately. And so it doesn't make sense to have a very strong infill policy, for example, that encourages mixed use, let's say, in the Gateway area plan, if you want to also use that in Valley West and in the Sunnybray mixed use area. If you put it in the general plan, that it applies everywhere where there's a trigger for it. Now, there's been some concern expressed about, for instance, the community benefits program applying citywide, because the community benefits program is, and we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail when we get into the policy, but the community benefits program, it creates a pathway so that if you provide community benefits, you comply with the form-based code, and you provide a minimum amount of housing, then you get a ministerial permit. That's the way it's envisioned in the Gateway area. If you put the community benefits program in the general plan, you could then create a triggering mechanism in Valley West. Maybe there's a form-based code or something in the code that says within this infill opportunity zone, you can also do community benefits, form-based code, and et cetera. And you don't have to replicate that body of policy in a new area plan for just that area. And so what I've prepared for you tonight, what's in the staff report, and what we're going to walk through is a way to not just drop these policies, not just think about how do we take these policies, which ones do we want to apply citywide, but it's also a way to operationalize that. So what I'm presenting to you tonight is a way to take the policy that you want to recommend, and we're going to go through an exercise. You're going to say this one, not that one, instead of the circulation element, put that in the land use element. You're going to go through that process in a minute. Once you've done that, these questions that I presented here are going to be the very next questions that you're going to be thinking about. And so I've taken the opportunity to spell out not only which policies I believe should go into the general plan, not only which elements they should go into, and more specifically, what policies they should line up with. I'm also preparing for you a proposal for how you can operationalize that, not just in the Gateway area, but also in other areas when you create a triggering mechanism for that.
Thanks. Okay, can you continue?
Okay, so the last part of this before we jump into the actual policy matrix, I wanted to orient you to the matrix itself. It's changed a little bit since when you saw it on the 28th, and also since putting it in your packet here. So I want to orient you to those. Column C here has the policy/element, and this is from the original Gateway. So the designations you see here are the original Gateway policy designations. This is policy 7A from the Gateway plan. We can also see here what was in the first recommendation when I first brought this to the Planning Commission in column E. In column F, you see what was presented to the City Council Planning Commission on 11/28 at your study session. And then column D shows what our current recommendation is for the element that we think that this policy should be moved into, along with column B, which identifies the new policy number. So that orients you to the table that you have. We've now added a new column, and this is going to track the discussion tonight. And basically, we're going to put the commission, we're going to identify in column A if a commissioner wants to discuss one of these policies and doesn't want to just adopt them writ large. So we'll track that in this column A. You'll see that in the table that we're going to show. The next thing I want to orient you to is, I guess first, does that make sense, each of those columns? Any questions about that? Okay. The next thing I want to orient you to is what this new policy column has done. So for instance, policy element 7G, the old 7G, staff is recommending that we move that to the circulation element, and more specifically that we add it to the policy CM1B. So this parentheses add means that it's being added into an existing policy. So for 7G, what that would look like is here's CM1B, existing based on all of the public input that we've had to date, and this is based on the most updated Planning Commission recommendation, all of this text in black. And I wanted to show you that if the Planning Commission says, yes, let's do this, add 7G to 1B, CM1B, it would be added to the end here, and literally verbatim, finish incomplete blocks with active transportation infrastructure where the urban grid pattern is interrupted or incomplete. Evaluate opportunities to continue the circulation block pattern with new connections that consist of entirely non-vehicular active transportation facilities. Verbatim, taking the policy from the Gateway Area Plan and dropping it into the complete streets. Now, you might say as a commission, no, we want this to be its own policy in the circulation and mobility element. We can quickly change that and it would show up as an independent policy if you don't think this is the appropriate place to put it. Those policies that do not have add on the end of them are new policy numbers. For the most part, these are tacked onto the end. There's a couple of places where I actually interstitially place them in between existing policy. That'll mean changing policy numbers for all the following policies after them, but it just made more sense to drop them in there. But for the most part, as in the example of 7C here, Gateway Area Plan 7C, I'm recommending that you put it into Circulation and Mobility 1I. So that's how you read the new policy numbering. And that'll orient you for the discussion you're about to have. I think this is the last thing I wanted to orient you to is that there are track changes, quote unquote, underline and strikeout. This is not changing the substantive text here. What this is doing is changing it from a reflection of it being solely part of the Gateway Area Plan and now recognizing it as a citywide policy. So 7L is recommended to drop it, I think that's 7L. 7I is recommended to drop into CM5E as an addition to that policy. In order to do that, we change this from things like plan area to city. So within the plan area, drop that out because it applies citywide now, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's what the track changes and underlined strikeout is. Last thing I want to orient you to, I forgot about this piece, is that there have been changes since the version that was dropped into your packet, and I've identified these here visually by highlighting them. I've highlighted the cells that have changed, and so on the bottom here, nothing has changed about the language that was in your packet, but I changed the recommendation to delete 7K, and the reason I'm proposing that is because there's no corresponding community benefit. In your packet, this slipped my attention as I was going back through them. I've done a lot of work on these policies since creating the packet. I recognize that you recommended removing this from the community benefits program, and so I'm recommending that you remove it from the plan altogether, not move it into the general plan. By contrast, 7H3 here, I believe the recommendation in your packet is to delete this. I've had some suggestion to keep it and to actually enhance. This is an area where, as we'll look at, we can add some language, enhance it, and keep it in the gateway plan, so you'll see that yellow highlighted. Now for these, I've added in the discuss question mark column A, that staff is recommending changes here. This is the sum total of them here. You can see most of them were just a change of where they fell or a renumbering within the gateway plan. But we have a couple that have substantive comments that I'm going to draw your attention to, or substantive changes to the topics. The first one here is the one that we were looking at before, 7H3. It was pointed out to me by a public member that this would be a good place to provide the direction that council gave us to enhance K and 11th Streets in particular. And so I've added include traffic calming throughout the plan area to improve bike and pedestrian safety along K Street, 11th Street, and other high volume two-way streets. And I'm recommending we add that in as GA7D instead of deleting it. And so this is a change from what's in your packet A. This was literally direction from the council. I highly recommend we adopt it. The other one that had some substantive change here is in 7L. This is more succinct the way that it's currently written, and I think it conveys better what we were intending to convey. This actually, the way it was drafted before, conveyed the exact opposite of what we've been talking about with regard to parking maximums and minimums. And so instead of having this obtuse language, disconnect parking minimums from land uses and only require off-street parking as a development standard in limited cases, like hotels. We actually don't want to require a parking standard for hotels. The intent here is not to put a maximum on hotels, so I've changed this language, made it simpler to read, eliminate parking minimums, use parking maximums for most land uses, except in limited cases like hotels and other regional draws. So those land uses, we typically will put a maximum of parking on land uses, but for those land uses where we know you're going to have a regional draw or people are coming to a hotel from out of the area, most people are not taking a train to get here, they're using a car. If they took a train, they're renting a car. Those land uses shouldn't have maximums. We'll let the market dictate that. So that's the main change here. And you can dig into this in more detail when we get to the actual policy work that we're doing. I just wanted to point out to you those couple of exceptions. Lastly, I did put out, after the staff report was released, an example in situ what these changes will look like. And so I revised the Gateway Area Plan. I provided this draft version 14A. This is a draft for discussion purposes only. And as the commenter pointed out, this unintentionally said that you had reviewed this. This was released before your review. This was intended to reflect that this is a working draft. And so apologize for the error in the language there. We'll certainly correct that. And anything that you adopt tonight will be reflected in a new version 15 that will have this disclaimer that it was based on your recommendation. For the policies that are recommended in your table that are going into the design element, I took the design element that is basically your latest recommendation, and then I imported and used track changes to show policies that came verbatim out of this document here and were placed into the design element. And with very few exceptions, for example, to orient the reader, for example, D8, Community Benefits Program, that's completely new and novel. It was not in the Gateway Area Plan, but it's necessary to complete the organization of this element now. So those are new. Everything else you see in underlines are direct verbatim translations from the Gateway Plan into the design element. Provided those to you and the public on Friday, made them accessible. They're in the binder and all that good stuff, so that you could see if I made this policy decision as recommended by staff, this is what the outcome would be. I wanted you to have a real tangible sense for that. So with that, we're going to open the spreadsheet. Jenna's going to take over the comm and track your discussion, and I will help facilitate where I can, but I'm going to turn it back over to the chair at this point.
Okay, thank you for that. My goal is that we get through this material and are able to get a stable recommendation so that we can keep this process moving. And because there are many decisions to be made tonight, I'm going to borrow from the framework system we used earlier in the year to give us a chance at getting through all of this material. I'm going to start by asking if the entire batch of recommendations in attachment A can be passed as drafted. If not, I will ask each commissioner in turn which items they would need to remove for discussion to be able to pass the balance of recommendations. After passing that balance of recommendations, we will work on whatever items are removed. For each recommendation removed, I am going to call for a vote and would be looking for at least a majority of the commissioners voting to discuss it. Otherwise, the original recommendation will stand. The person who removed the item, providing the majority supports the discussion, will provide a succinct argument for the change proposed. And I would love it if we could really be succinct. We all sometimes can get fall into going around 2 and 3 times when we're making a point. So I would ask everyone to just try and be focused. There's a lot to get through. Commissioners should ideally keep these pitches to less than 45 seconds. And I'll ask for a show of hands for interest in discussing the matter further. If less than a majority vote to discuss, the original recommendation will be passed. If a majority does vote to discuss their recommendation, the commissioner making the pitch will take a minute to flesh out their recommendation. Anyone wishing to make a counterproposal may do so, also striving for a minute or less, and then we will vote to pass the change. A majority vote will change the proposal. Staff has provided a summary of the process so commissioners can track the conversation. Do any commissioners have any questions right now about the process? Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, are we going to be discussing then both the policy element and where the element fits in columns? I forget the name, the numbers on the columns, you know, to the right of the page, whether or not they're part of the gateway plan or the entire general plan.
Yeah, basically, we'll start with the negative vote. If you agree with everything on this list, which I suspect that you won't, that you'll have a couple policies you want to pull, then you would just adopt it as is. If, for instance, you know, on the top one under row 2, PF6H, if you think that instead of putting that in public facilities, it should go in the, you know, historic element instead, you would say, I want to pull that one and discuss it.
Okay, so really my question is, are we discussing the element itself? I know we've been through this before, but a few of these, a number of them did catch my eye as something like, oh gosh, is that really how this played out? I'm surprised.
Yeah, if anyone has a concern or a reason to pull any one of these elements, whether it's where it's ending up or language, what I'm saying is I want to get a majority. What I don't want to do is get bogged down in a 6-hour conversation over multiple meetings. So if the majority of the commission agrees that there's enough meat on the bone there to discuss the issue, then we can move into this process and discuss it. If not, it will pass as it stands.
Great, thank you.
Oh, your mic. Scott, I think.
Yeah. Do any commissioners have any objections to the staff proposal, recognizing that we can amend the community benefits program once it is operational if it needs to be?
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can jump into the negative polling on,
Yeah. Well, I guess my question now then is, do any commissioners object to the staff proposal?
All pages? All
In
the
its
way through?
entirety,
Yeah,
like a consent?
I do.
Dan?
And at that end of the table.
Judith? Anybody else have questions? Joel? Okay, well, let's take, how do you want to, so let's
Yes.
pull these specific items and then return to pass everything else as a batch.
yeah, so if you can do it however you want. You can give us the new policy number or the original policy number, and we'll be able to find them. If you can read them to us slowly so that we can track them on this sheet, that would be great.
Are you ready?
Why don't you start, Danielle? Go ahead.
Okay. I'll just go through it as quickly as I can. D-6F, sidewalk zones. No less than 6 feet wide is the part that I've circled. And you want me to just continue now to the next one? Or do you want to stop and discuss that for a
Let's list them
moment?
all. Let's list them
Okay.
all. And then
D-
we'll return to discuss.
D-8K, sustainable and green buildings as a community amenity. D-1A, ensure quality materials that maintain their appearance over time. GA-5A, incentivize artist housing and cultural spaces. GA-7A.1 is also about sidewalks being up to a 6-foot width. LU-1T, and it's just some language that I think could be improved.
Sorry. D-5A was the last one that I got, Dan.
Okay, I think now we're on LU-1T. And I'll be brief on all these, I promise. If it says delete, you're already recommending delete on these, right? So we don't need to discuss it, okay? That's it.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Judith, can you list the individual pieces that you want to pull so staff can itemize those?
I can.
Thank you.
Those will not appear in the order of importance that I've identified them. Would you prefer that I?
Well, we're going to try and go through them
first?
all and see what the commission as a whole thinks. So I think if we can just get the list, then we'll just move through them regardless of the priority.
Oh, okay. And I'm wondering if it's possible to distinguish between those that I think should be stated differently for the gateway than for the city as a whole, even though a policy may move to the city as a whole. There's some that should be much more emphatic for the gateway, which is the reason that we adopted them for the gateway, whereas for the city as a whole movement, it's a weaker policy. How would you like to deal with them?
I think just list the ones that you feel you want to discuss. We'll put it to the commission as a whole. If everyone agrees and wants to hear it, then you can dig in further and tell us what your thinking is.
Okay, I would venture that requiring everyone to agree is an extreme consensus here.
Majority, I misspoke.
Okay. I'm sorry, my glasses aren't working on this type of print. I'm trying to figure out where, this is alphabetical, right? Okay. So 7 CM2B, 7E, consider non-motorized campus layouts. I think that's a very gateway policy and perhaps is not entirely appropriate for the entire city.
Can we just do the list of numbers and then we'll go into the deliberations afterwards? And you're tracking the.
Yep, that was
Okay,
CM2B you had,
Okay,
Judith.
great. CM5C, CM5D, CM3D and 5F, CM5A, CM1J, and if there are things that should stay in the gateway rather than be moved around or moved to a different place in the general plan, you want those too, right?
Yep.
Okay, CM5E, D8N. Sorry, it's kind of a list. And D8A, 2D.
I'm sorry, can you also say the name of it? Because for instance, CM5E has
Okay,
5 of these.
D8A2D choice of benefits with regard to the categories. There are a number of things that I feel should be in a different area of the general plan. It's a pretty long list. I don't know that this is the place to do that.
Lay them out. Yeah, I think this is the opportunity to make changes to where the policies land. And so if you want to make a pitch for that, then this is the time to do it.
Okay, almost all of the D8s, I feel we should discuss where in the general plan those should appear. I don't believe that we should stuff them all into the design element because many of them go far beyond design. They're more housing and land use. D4A, mid-block passageways. I was basing that on the track changes version that I was able to see. D6G. D1F. GA1A, I'm not understanding what you want us to do with that, since it refers specifically to the gateway. But then you've designated it in land use, so I'm just confused about the wording there. Land use targets.
That one is specific to the gateway, and it is recommended for being in the gateway.
Okay, so this is not to be moved?
The ones that start with GA would stay in the gateway.
Okay, those would all stay. Great. A, B, C, D. Okay, so all of the GAs would stay in the gateway?
Yes. And
would not be extended to the general plan? I'm not quite understanding why they're on the list then.
Yeah, again, going back to that, that graphic, if they're in the gateway plan, they do not apply outside of the gateway area. They would only apply in the gateway area. And then in the column D that says element at the top, anyone that's listed as gateway, the recommendation is that that policy stay in the gateway.
Great, okay. LU1T and LU1U. And this relates to incentivize projects to provide designated community and amenities and by right approval, extending that to the entire city if there's a triggering mechanism, presumably. All right. And then there's a bunch of there's a bunch of the deletions that haven't gone into the general plan, but they're being deleted. A few of them I'm thinking could be policies, but not necessarily associated with the community benefit. And yet they can be policy language with regard to the intent of the plan. is that something that you want to discuss now, or is that something that can come later? For example, the enhanced architectural features, although they aren't associated with a specific community benefit score, they're important design policies nevertheless. So that would be 9A, and there's not another number associated with that.
Well, just give us what you've got, and we'll work through the list as a group.
Okay. And the others are things that I feel should be moved around, and I think we've got enough on our plate right now, so I will probably let them just go.
Okay. Joel, you had a couple that you were wanted to discuss. Paul?
Yeah, I just had one, GA7D. 7L is the,
I'm sorry, was that the original or the new?
under the first column, it's GA7D, and I don't know whether that's the new or the.
7D?
That's the one that you,
7D?
7D, yes.
Okay. Okay, and that was one of the ones that had changed, so we were going to pull those anyway.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So, okay, so we're going to have to play a little catch up because I didn't catch everything, but I think what our hope is to, I didn't type everything in, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort these to start with. And any of the ones that we haven't checked here, we'll go back and double check. So we'll narrow this down. And I think, just, to start would probably be, it'd be worthwhile to do just sort of, rapid fire voting because we've got a lot more than I anticipated we might have.
Well, I think initially I just want to confirm everything else we're agreeing should stay as is, which is to say everyone's pulled anything that they need to discuss. So does that tie off that portion of that sufficiently for you?
Yep.
Okay, so I think as we go through these, we're giving the number and then we're identifying at least just the title of it. And then I would like to see a show of hands for which commissioners would like to take the time to discuss this further. If you don't vote for it, what you're saying is you're fine with the policy and its destination as written in the staff report. Good?
Excuse me, that doesn't actually provide an opportunity for people who want to make a case for change to actually make that case.
That's true. But what I said at the beginning is I don't want to take that time unless the majority of the commission agrees that they want to discuss that. So if the majority of the commission wants to discuss an item, then we will move into that. If not, then we'll move on.
I strongly object to that approach.
Understood.
Go ahead.
Is
Go
that
ahead, Abby.
following the 45-second spiel of why they felt it should be pulled?
What I'm saying is Dan can say D6F, what it is. We will identify what item that is. Commissioners then, as a group, we will decide, do we want to discuss this issue? A majority say, yes, let's do that. If we do, then you make your pitch. If there's any counter proposals, we hear them, and then we'll vote as a group and move on. Otherwise,
If I could just interject real quick, I think there is a step in there that we're missing where, and it should be very succinct. So for instance, I've got D6G up here. Let's say I wanted to pull D6G. You should be able to say, I think D6G, which is proposed to go in the design element, should actually be in the commercial mixed use. That's it. And do folks want to talk about that? If you get a majority, then you move on. If you don't get a majority, then it stays as it is. So it does give
Precisely.
people an opportunity, but let's make this crisp, succinct, and tell us exactly what it is that your proposal is. You don't have to go into the reason why, just tell us what the proposal is. That'll give everyone the opportunity to say, yeah, I kind of, I want to hear more, or, no, I'm good with where it's at.
Did everybody get that? Okay. So Dan, as you went first, let's start with your items.
Okay, first item, D-6F, sidewalk zones. This is on page 14, about a third of the way down. All it says here, and the only thing that caught my eye, is no less than 6 feet wide for future sidewalk development. And I just want to point out that a 6-foot wide sidewalk will never have a street tree in it. You need 7 feet for a street tree. If we're okay with that, we'll move on.
Show
And I know
hand-
that every foot is critical because of bike lanes and everything else. I totally get all of that.
That was very succinct, thank you. Show of hands, do we want to discuss this further? Okay, one vote, moving on.
All right. Next one, I have less energy about this. D-8K, sustainable and green buildings as a community amenity. I just want to know that the city staff has the capacity to judge all of the green building amenities. I mean, there's so many parts and variables on that one that it just feels like it's going to be a tough thing unless there's some lead building thing that they can just say go with that. Otherwise, we're developing this whole crazy list of what's green.
Got it. Show of,
Just for clarification, I think those are, those are on-site green building amenities.
That who judges? Who qualifies?
Yeah, those wouldn't be up to the city to maintain. Those would be on-site, so the developer would maintain those.
I'm thinking them as parts of the building and that they go through plan review and design review and everything else, and somebody has to say, did this fit the green building thing or not? And do they get a community amenity point for it or not? Is that not too complicated? Sounds really complicated. That's why it caught my eye.
I see what you're saying. They're further defined in the community benefits program, and we would have to design some guardrails around that. But yeah, this is what the community said they wanted. This is what you all said you wanted at the beginning. So that would be.
show of hands to dig into this further. Okay, next item, Dan.
D-1A, sorry, this is similar, ensure quality materials that maintain their appearance over time. That one just seems super mushy to me. That's called building code. There's the code is, and you're not going to say, well, don't use cedar, you should use redwood because it might last. Well, what grade of redwood do I get to use? Just tell me what the code is. I don't know who's going to ever look at that or judge it or rate somebody's project based on that. Enforce that.
And some of these are, they are, a little subjective. This is the design or the policy level. These would be further refined in the code level. I think that's one where that would happen. Don't care either way, but I just wanted to point out that some of this stuff is going to seem like, how does somebody do that? Because there's not a whole lot of information at the policy level.
But it's because it's policy level.
Yeah.
If it needs to stay, I don't have a lot of energy for it. Just wanted to point it
Show
out.
of hands for that item, further discuss, okay?
I guess if there's enough people, it's.
Okay,
All right, I'm batting zero. We'll move on. Incentivize artist housing. I can't imagine who's going to keep track of that and judge who's an artist. Do they have to make a living as an artist? Do they just have a hobby as an artist and they get the housing because they like art? I just
Sorry, Dan,
don't-
what number is that one? I'm sorry.
Sorry, GA-5A.
Okay.
I just can't imagine the criteria around that one. And that it's a community amenity. Like, if this is part, and I'm sorry, does that mean community benefits? I've been struggling with when the word amenity is used and when benefit is used, because it goes back and forth. If it's on our community benefits program, I want some teeth in it. I want an objective T.
So this one, the proposal is to delete it because you've already deleted this from the community amenities program. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong one. So is the GA-5A is in the new policy column?
It's 5D,
Yeah, 5D, packet page 16.
incentivize artist.
And I think I voted against this one every time it came up, and it keeps surviving, and I think Dan is in the same boat.
5D.
Okay, so do we want to discuss?
Clean my damn ears out.
Okay. Let's get in, that one's on the list to discuss. So do we want to,
Let's stop for a minute.
let's stop for a minute and go into this. So give us a little bit more
Well,
about what you're thinking.
I think I
there.
already did. Just who qualifies as an artist? We all like art. Do I get to live there? And for how many years? What if I stop liking art, or stop doing art, or stop showing my main income as art? Do I have to move out? I just don't see how over time this works at all. And that it's a community benefit, to me, it's not objective. It's mushy.
Is there an opposing view to that? Is there, can we see a show of hands that agrees with Dan's general position on that? Noted by staff?
We're still trying to search for it, the exact one you're talking about.
Packet
5D.
page 16.
Page 16.
Yeah, the packet page isn't going to help because I'm on a
If you-
completely different format here.
Command F, incentivize artist housing.
This one was proposed for deletion.
Okay, that wasn't reflected in our packet.
Yeah, this is one of the yellow ones.
Okay, so delete, we're, great.
Okay, I think the next one I said was GA-7A.1, which gets back to the sidewalk width thing of 6 feet. That, I think, unfortunately restricts street trees. But we already crossed that bridge. So could I move on?
Please.
LU-1T, and I just think that the wording on that one could be a lot better. And I'm going to suggest my change, an edit.
Where's that?
LU-1T on packet page 19.
Okay.
About the fifth one up, and I think, Judith, you brought this one up also. Incentivize projects that provide designated community amenities. As that sentence reads, establish ministerial permitting options and streamline development processes for projects that create housing and, is what I would add in, and provide designated community amenities, period. The rest of the sentence is that contribute to quality of life, and I don't care about that. I think that's already said as a community benefit.
Where's the commission land on that? People in favor of that?
To speak about?
Well, could you vote in favor of the change? As
I'm in
proposed?
favor of a slightly different change.
So shall we just revisit it, because it was on her list too? So when we get, I think that was the end of my list, so.
Okay, well, let's just skip to your list now, Judith, and we will eventually get to the LU1T, and we can discuss it then if everyone.
Why don't we start there?
Can we start there? Because that
Sure.
feeds into some other issues. This is moving this into the general plan and presumably out of the gateway implies that we are also, right now, in our general plan amendments, creating a community benefits program that could apply citywide if some triggering design code or land use code or other designation happens in those other areas at some point in the future. The problem with that, and this is our first example of it that's come up, there are many others, is that when we conceived of the community benefits program for the Gateway, it really was seen as a kind of a trial run, an experimental program, based on the idea of providing incentives, which, as we've discussed it more and more, have come to collide with the incentives already created by the state's density bonus program, chances are that benefits program and its efficacy as a tool may be continually eroded. And if we start extending those programs and policies to the rest of the city in this version of the general plan amendments, rather than waiting until we've tested it first, we're kind of creating sneaker policies, in the way that spy movies refer to sneaker spies that are inactive until suddenly, the order comes to say, okay, we can activate it now. By keeping it in the Gateway program, if we're focusing on a community benefits program, we will allow that to be tried in the area for which we designed it, and to make it an effective part of that program without necessarily creating a structure that's going to kind of crop up suddenly and possibly inappropriate in other areas of the city. I think we should wait to create those broader community benefits programs that would apply in other areas of the city.
So your specific proposal is to wait on this? Is that?
Well, Dan's proposal was to simplify the wording. My proposal is to keep it in the Gateway, but not extend it to the rest of the general plan. And it's one of several community benefits references about which I would make the same recommendations.
Okay, I failed the process here by letting us get into this discussion without actually taking a vote to see if everyone wanted to actually discuss this item further. But we're here now, so I'll let this continue. Let's take a vote on, well, go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, Judith, point of clarity, if there's a number of these, if anywhere where community benefits program is bled over into a citywide policy, you want to discuss all of them, perhaps that should just be a separate discussion. Should the Gateway community benefits program stay in the Gateway and not extend beyond? Is that
That's correct.
And then we won't have to discuss every element.
That's a great point. So given that, let's take this piece by piece and vote on whether commissioners want to support Dan's proposal for a language change, as he stated earlier. Is there a show of hands for support for the clarifying language that Dan proposed earlier?
This is clarifying language if it's applied citywide.
Correct, but I can only take one piece at a time. So the majority of the commission supports that change in language. And now we can, I suppose, address the wider issue, which includes this item, about whether or not you have concerns about whether or not items that are in the gateway should actually be applied citywide. Is that correct?
Yeah, in this case, I'm referring specifically to the community benefits program. It was developed with regard to the gateway. We haven't really discussed it with regard to any other area. These benefits are linked to the form-based code, presumably, and they would presumably then be activated only if other areas also have their own form-based codes, which at this point, they don't. It's possible to amend the general plan to include such things later on if it seems that they have been successful in providing the incentive we want them to in the gateway, and if and when they're adopted to other areas in the city, including infill opportunity zones. They could be adjusted and made appropriate and improved for those situations in the future. But it's premature to include those community benefits in language that would apply as sleeper policies for the city as a whole right now.
So
So-
you want to know if we want to discuss that now, right?
I want to know if the commissioners want to entertain that discussion or vote no, which is to say you're happy with it, the community benefits being moved out of that smaller circle and into the bigger circle. Dan, that's
I
a
feel like we
yes
should
vote.
discuss it.
That's 3-4 and 4 against.
No,
You're for that.
yeah, I'd like to discuss it.
Okay, so, so then let's dig into those, gateway, into the broader general code, discussion. Go ahead, Judith.
Okay, I think I probably just
Yeah, you said
made
it.
my argument, and anything more I could say right now before we hear from other folks, we'll just muck it up. So I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks.
Other concerns or comments, pushback on Judith's position?
Well, I agree that I think it is a big step for it, all of these community benefits to move into a larger city realm, and I would like to hear from city staff about the main reasoning that we got here, and I'm just not remembering how we got from there to here.
Can you give us a brief refresher and perhaps address any concerns that might be associated with possibly moving gateway-specific community benefits into the wider city?
Yeah, absolutely. First, let me start with an analogy. We have several policies in the general plan that pertain to, ESHA, environmentally sensitive habitat. And those policies only trigger when there's an ESHA present, so they don't apply everywhere. In the same way, the proposal to move the community benefits program into the general plan will rely on a trigger. It doesn't affect any property unless there is a zoning code amendment that creates that trigger. So it's resting in place in the general plan for other areas should the council decide we want to use that elsewhere. The reason we're having this conversation today is because on the 28th of last month, the city council had a discussion and said, hey, listen, we think we ought to expand these policies. We ought to do this kind of planning work elsewhere in the city. We think it's a good idea to do that. We'd like the planning commission ultimately to tell us which of the policies we should do that with. And so this is an opportunity. Again, we were myopic on the Gateway Area Plan. A lot of the work that we did to develop the policy and the programs and the structure in there were tied specifically to the Gateway area because we were myopic on it. As we're zooming out and saying we want to apply these kinds of principles elsewhere in the city, in other infill opportunity zones, it's an opportunity to move these into that broader body of policy. It doesn't affect or change in any way, shape, or form any of the other zones where you don't have, currently the Gateway area is the only place where it would apply. So there's no harm in doing it, I guess is what staff's recommendation is. It's not a specific policy that is intimately and intricately tied to the Gateway area, so it should be a broader policy.
And to activate, as it were, community benefits in another area, it would require a form-based code being created for that area, which would presumably articulate which community benefits would be applicable or how they would be implemented specific to that area. Is that
Yeah, form-based
correct?
code or some other form of trigger. So for instance, if you wanted to apply community benefits, right now the Gateway requires, that you're minimally 30 units of housing, that you comply with the form-based code, and that you provide a community benefit. It could be that, within, smaller commercial mixed-use zones, for example, there's a different set of amenities that you want to focus on and a different set of priorities that you want to get at. And so maybe you don't have a form-based code. Maybe it's just, provide, housing and commercial space and a community amenity. So there's different ways that it could be used in different zones, but those triggers to create those would have to be developed. There are none in the code currently. There are no way that you would use this community benefits program in anywhere except the Gateway area currently.
But does agreeing to move the policy out of the Gateway specific area into the broader code for the city increase the likelihood that as zoning changes in other areas, community benefits are more likely to be part of that change across the city?
Yeah, and we wouldn't have to go through a general plan amendment just for that purpose. The city council just identified or authorized an application for a HUD Pro housing grant specifically to develop a form-based code in the Valley West and a form-based code in the downtown Uniontown Shopping Center. They're looking at doing exactly what we just did in the Gateway area in other parts of town. And so we're setting ourselves up so that we're ready for that transition in these other areas. I think it's really appropriate to plan for what we know and see on the horizon by taking the step to move these into the broader body of policy.
I mean, we have repeatedly said here as a group that we are, one of the things we're most
Originally hoped. By tying other areas in the city to an identical approach, we may be eliminating or downgrading the chance that when those other areas are ready to figure out appropriate incentives for those locations, that they can't develop something far, far better. And so I feel like this is kind of tying some future great plans into tools that may not be as appropriate as tools developed for those areas. And the fact that it would be in the general plan would mean that we'd have to make an excuse not to do that rather than to develop something that can be more effective. I think that writing a plan with sort of sleeper language in it is not a great way to go, because what you're doing is you're putting in policies that are relevant today when in fact we have an opportunity to develop better policies later, and we're stepping aside from that opportunity. I don't think we should be afraid of amending either the general plan or developing appropriate form-based or other codes for other opportunity zones. The idea here is that each zone in the city is unique, and we should provide opportunities to recognize that.
I think we should also recognize that the city council could just put these right back in, right? I mean, we're just recommending. If they want them in, they can put them in.
Well, obviously, the city council, yeah, they'll make the ultimate decision. But, I mean, to the extent, Judith, to which you point out that we shouldn't be afraid of changing things, I don't see, or, I mean, a question for staff, is there any reason, based on the decision before us this evening, that we couldn't, in the future, for other areas, amend or adjust the community benefits to be specific to that area?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's any risk in adopting these now. Frankly, there's no risk in keeping them in the general plan either. I mean, it does mean a change that we're seeing on the very near horizon, and ignoring that. That's why we recommended them. But I think that, the argument's been made, the rebuttal's been made, the counter argument's been made, and that's been rebutted. I would suggest a vote.
Yeah. So the vote then is, are you in favor of changing this so that the community benefits stay isolated to the Gateway area? Or if you're a no vote, you're fine with the language as proposed so that it moves out into the broader general plan? Joel?
As proposed by Dan?
Correct.
Are we just voting on this one specific kind of high-level policy, or on every policy in here? I think Judith said she identified several that mentioned community benefits.
These are all linked together. There's a program that's being moved from the Gateway Area Plan to the general plan in this proposal. If you say we do not want to move that program into the general plan, then it has cascading effects and it would change probably about 10 or 15 other policies. And instead of moving them in, most of them going into the design element, they would just stay in the general plan. Thank you. Gateway plan.
So the question is, yes, you want to restrict the community benefits to the gateway area, or no, you're comfortable with seeing them move into the general plan? Can we go around? Abby?
I'd be interested in supporting Dan's modifications.
And
My modification then just on LU-1T.
Right.
Yeah, that was just that little language thing. That's
And
not the
allowing
bigger
the community
question.
benefits program to spill into the general plan.
thank you. Matt?
I want to allow it to spill into the general plan.
Judith?
I'd like to keep it specific to the gateway as we have discussed it for 2 years.
Joel?
I think the community benefits should be applied in the general plan.
Peter?
I agree, it should apply citywide.
Dan?
I agree it should go into the general plan.
Okay, so for all of those items, the majority, which I will vote with, would like to see community benefits put into the broader general plan. Let's move on now to the other items that you brought to us, Judith, that do not center on gateway items moving into the general plan.
Well, I think they all will center on gateway items moving to the general plan, but specifically items that aren't related to the community benefits moving into the general plan.
Okay, it brings up sort of another level of that onions. If all of those things that staff has recommended move into the general plan, will move into the general plan. Right now, they're pretty much all centered in the design element. A lot of those things really belong elsewhere in the general plan. And I'll make some comments about those if this is the appropriate time to do so.
So would you characterize this as another block of recommendations that have to do with
They'd come
a
up
destination?
in those, in that set of recommendations that all came together in the design element, the way staff has proposed moving them. Some of those are actually land use, some are circulation or mobility, and they probably don't belong specifically in the design element because they are either more specific to other things or more general, as in the land use code amendments. So,
Can I ask staff, is this similar to the linked effect with the community benefits in the gateway area plan where there will be add-on effects?
I think I'm hearing a slight nuance here. I've pulled up all the design policies, recommended design policies, and I think what you're saying, Commissioner Mayer, is that you believe some of these should be in the land use element.
yes, some should be in the land use element, some should be in the mobility or circulation element.
So we've got them up here. I think I may have missed some of the ones that you had suggested, but I've got all the design policies up, so if you want to go through these.
Okay, that's not how I was sort of organizing things, but I can read them right now if my glasses allow.
And so you'll make a proposal of what you think, and then we will vote on whether we want to take that into a further discussion.
Okay, and to do this, looking at what you've just put up, David, could you move that so we can see the next column?
The one this column here?
Yeah, because that indicates.
To the right.
Right,
Yes.
that they've been in the design thing. So I noticed that in the design element, most of those in the draft that you sent us appear under building design, and that's part of where the problem comes in, because although they may be design, You've put them under building design in that draft. And certainly parking lot location, is not building design. It's as much mobility as it is anything else, and it doesn't appear there.
Okay.
The privately owned spaces as a community amenity,
Hold on. Let's stop and take that. Unless we can take these, we think we need to take these individually and not.
okay, and it's hard to discuss this without actually looking at the design element and where staff has located them within the design element. And that may be one level too deep for this discussion today.
Go ahead, Joel.
I think it probably is.
I have a question. Is this kind of form over substance? Does it really matter where something is in the general plan?
Can I respond to that? It absolutely does.
I'm asking the planning director, is there any,
Is it
than
is it
maybe
a
a
distinction
logical
without a
reason,
difference?
is there any practical effect of putting something in one section versus another?
I think I'm hearing what Commissioner Mayer is saying, and I will acknowledge that each of the general plan elements has a slightly different organization. Some of them were real conducive to putting policies in place. The land use element is an example where at the beginning of the land use element policy, the first block of policy is just general stuff. It may not apply to everything, but it's just general stuff. So it was easy to throw general stuff in there. The design element, when you get into these policy blocks, I might have had to shoehorn something, overall community character. It seems to me that, having parking lots behind the buildings and having building facades in front fits in with overall community character. But what I'm hearing Commissioner Mayer say is maybe not. And then specifically to your point, even if the policy is a little bit shoehorned and doesn't nest real neatly into that body of policy, it still is effective policy. And so when you're going to, regulate based on, look at the findings based on these policy documents, you would still look at that body of policy, regardless of where it's housed. In fact, when we're doing findings, we generally disembody them from the actual elements and the structure that they're in, and we just identify the policies that are relevant to the discussion that we're having at the time. So probably yes, I guess would be my answer.
Okay, so can we go back to the last specific policy? Just like to see a show of hands, commissioners that would like to discuss where this is getting moved to or are comfortable where it is.
Can you show us the column to the right? Like it's presently in the design element, is it getting moved out of that?
No, this element column is the element that it's being proposed to be in. This was the first recommendation for where to move it. And it was originally in the body of policy under 7M in the Gateway area. That is the circulation and mobility policy. The reason why I'm recommending it go into design and not circulation and mobility is because this is really more about the design of street facades and the relationship to parking there. This was housed under a body of policy that there was a lot of design elements to the Gateway area plans, circulation mobility chapter. And so it just was natural to nest them in other elements.
Well, and I guess this is a bit philosophical, but most policies will affect more than one element of the general plan, right? And we don't have this qualm in other instances, right? So like density will impact circulation by changing the number of people in a certain area, but we don't complain that we don't talk about density in the circulation element.
So, show of hands, who would like to take time to discuss whether this lands in design or not? Okay, not seeing any. Can you go on to your next policy concern, Judith, please?
Yes, but I'd like to say right now, I think that appears under building design. It's more site design, and it may contradict the 360-degree design that is also in there, and be inconsistent with it. So I guess there it rests. So the privately owned open spaces as a community amenity, okay, this is really the community benefits program, but it's really more of a land use issue than I believe it appeared under building design. I'm not sure that that's the appropriate place for it. And certainly, open spaces and their locations should be a land use and open space consideration, and it doesn't appear in those parts of the draft general plan, so maybe it should appear there with reference. I mean, all of these community benefits things have been sort of glommed into one section of the design element, and I think that that's probably not where they're going to be most effective.
Show of hands for commissioners that would like to pull this for discussion. Okay, next item, please, Judith.
Okay, incentivize mixed use as a community amenity. That is absolutely a land use issue. It's not simply a design issue.
Show of hands for in favor of a discussion of this item. Okay, let's have this discussion.
I'm fine with moving it to land use, personally.
Abby,
Also fine with moving it to land use.
I agree.
Joel, Dan, Peter? Okay, let's move that one to land use.
Okay. I will just say that having the community amenities program scattered throughout the general plan as opposed to collected is a little odd, but we'll just make a side crib table that brings them all together, and we can make that work, so.
The side crib table makes a lot of sense, and you actually did set that up somewhere, if I recall, already. But that is a problem with extending the community benefits program citywide. It gets messy.
Okay, next item.
Okay, custom standards along designated streets. First, this refers specifically to the gateway, and we can either put it back in the gateway or possibly move that into the circulation and mobility section as well. I don't see any problem with it being both places.
Show of hands for discussing this one further. Go ahead.
We can delete gateway from this one if it's going to be moving into the general plan. I think that's a good catch.
Abby?
I was just going to ask if this is one maybe you already edited and highlighted yellow, but if not, then I am supportive of moving it.
That's a very gateway thing. I'd love to actually see it in the gateway.
That's two. Joel, where are you at?
Yeah, if we can find a synonym for gateway, I'd be happy for keeping this.
Well, okay, so now I think there's two different things being discussed. Should this remain in the gateway, or should this become a general plan policy without the word gateway in it, right? So you could just say, welcoming and vibrant city for the whole city, right? That was what I was talking about, but I think.
No, that's what I'm talking about. Leave it as it is, but delete gateway. Yeah, there we go.
So approve with a language change. And is that where you're at,
Yeah.
Joel? Peter? Dan?
Yes, and leave it in the design element.
David, you catch that? Okay, next item, Judith?
Its main building entrances, by doing this for the city as a whole, it's not clear that this is a community benefit issue. And it may actually contradict some of the campus-oriented design standards that we have already recommended elsewhere. And so you'll be creating, by putting it into the general plan in the design section, some internal contradictions within the plan.
Show of hands, concerns, desire to discuss this one further? Joel, you would like to discuss this further?
Yes.
Okay. Abby? Okay. Next item.
Pedestrian connections require pedestrian walk paths to connect entrances directly to public sidewalk. Wow, there's a whole lot of Arcata that doesn't have sidewalk. So when you have requirements that indicate something that does not exist in a design code, we have a bit of a problem. You could perhaps add where sidewalks exist. You could even extend that to require pedestrian walk paths and creation of sidewalks in all new development. But right now, you're creating a requirement that doesn't make a whole lot of sense the way it's stated, if it's to be applied citywide.
This wouldn't, the present paths in the city would be grandfathered in, right? This wouldn't apply except to new construction.
Yeah, this would apply to new construction. I guess I would also say that, this is, something specific. Pedestrian walk paths, are generally the paths that are internal to a project is the way I'm looking at this. And those do need to terminate to a sidewalk. When someone comes in with a project, if there are no sidewalks in front of their property, they're required to put in sidewalks. So I think this is okay the way that it's written, but.
Show of hands, commissioners that want to pull this for more discussion. Okay, next item, Judith.
D1A, pedestrian-friendly design. The part that may be problematic is locate parking facilities away from building frontages in the rear of the lot unless determined in feasible and unique circumstances. That we've already talked about this elsewhere, but I think to make it citywide and that emphatic, what you're doing is you're contradicting potentially the 360-degree design policy, which is also in there, and therefore creating some internal contradictions. If you have a requirement that parking be behind building frontages, you may be actually condemning people in rental units, for example, in the rear of the building to simply look out on a sea of parking, period. And so I think that contradiction with the 360-degree design is something that we need to take into account. When we were looking at the form-based code for the gateway, we were talking about, the public realm and streetscape-friendly design. If we're applying this to the whole city, in effect, what we're doing is we're also creating a climate for multifamily design with little in the way of safe yards and possible landscaping throughout the project. So I think there's got to be a way of.
Other commissioners that want to pull this item for discussion? Abby, Matt, Joel? Okay. Does not pass. Next item, please, Judith.
And we didn't get the
I'm
full.
not sure I mentioned all of this, but I would like to go to that 360-degree design, even though I didn't mention it. That is the policy that a number of these other policies potentially contradict, thereby creating internal contradictions within the plan that can open it up to challenges.
David, can you speak to potential conflicts there or how you see that?
I'm not sure I see a conflict. I mean, I think that what is being discussed here is to encourage people to have architectural design on all sides of the building. I'm not, and maybe I'm missing how that's in conflict, but, you know, and this could be, you know, again, this is at the policy level. It could be interpreted that, you know, you have to have, you know, columns and special, you know, designs around windows and et cetera, like hanging off of every side of the building. That's probably not how I would interpret it in every case. Sometimes the facade has more detail than the rear of the building, and I think that that would be okay, but I think, you know, consistent with this policy as well. So I'm not sure, I don't see a conflict,
Okay.
but maybe I'm just missing something.
Other commissioners would like to discuss this further? Okay, next item, Judith.
Okay, so you're okay with backyard sacrifice zones?
We are ready to hear your next item.
Okay, we already talked about the quality of materials. That was Dan's. Did I mention?
We didn't catch all of the items, and so what I did was I pulled together all of the design policies here. So you may not have mentioned all of these. The next one that I have recorded down is this D1F, public to private realm transitions.
Okay, both of those I did mention. This one, again, refers to sidewalks that may not exist. And I think that the private realm is actually more than just residents. We have private realm that incorporates, you know, institutions, businesses, commercial uses. It's not just residents.
Other commissioners that would like to discuss this item? Dan?
I'd just like to hear why it doesn't say something besides just residents there.
I think you could just get rid of that residences in parentheses, and I would be okay with that one, other than the references to the sidewalk. Just get rid of the stuff in parentheses.
Commissioners as a whole, how do we feel about that language change? Next item, Judith.
Okay, on this one, D1, transitions to lower intensity uses, I would, and we've discussed this before too, require buildings to incorporate massing strategies to minimize impacts on, I would like to see that as adjacent uses and eliminate single-family homes specifically. Those aren't the only uses that are affected by looming hulks. And so I don't necessarily want to privilege single-family homes over other homes or other uses.
Commissioners that want to discuss that one further? Abby? Joel?
I can live with the change.
Okay, so strike this and just put other users.
Yeah, other adjacent uses, or even get rid of adjacent, that would be okay too.
Okay, incorporate changes, and next item?
Okay, I'm not sure I mentioned the next,
Keep doing that.
the next item. D1M 8J lighting, specifically referring to the crime prevention through environmental design guidance. in many cases is going to create a conflict with the dark sky requirements. And so again, you're creating an internal contradiction here that I think maybe staff can figure out language to resolve. A lot of the CPTED lighting guidelines are in direct opposition with the dark sky policy guidance. And the city has run into this with our existing codes and code enforcements. This would just expand it and make it worse.
Can you speak to that contradiction, David?
I mean, I think the policy language says ensure all new lighting is compliant with dark sky. I think this part could be stricken since it's being moved to the general plan. So I would offer that, but you could, if you wanted to, strengthen that by saying this shall supersede the SEPTED policies.
Commissioners want to discuss this one further or comfortable with language? Show of hands if you want to pull this one. Okay. Next item.
Oh, I think the next one was about the 300-foot blocks. This is really a street design thing. It's not a building design thing. That's not maybe the appropriate place to stick it in the design section. And I did notice that there was a bunch of policy in the new draft referring to blocks longer than 300 feet and what you have to do about them, but that was totally separated from the language saying, let's not have any new blocks longer than 300 feet, which, if we're going to have that language, really needs to be next to the block length policy overall, and they were separated in the document in a way that makes it sound like, yeah, we're okay with those long blocks, but here's what we have to do to make them seem less long.
Other commissioners that want to pull this for discussion?
Are you suggesting we move it to transportation or something, or circulation?
Right now, it's under design, and I think it needs to be under land use, probably under circulation. And because the things linked to it refer to mid-block trails, it probably needs to be in the section on trail as well, and I don't have a problem with it appearing in all those places. But certainly things about what to do with long blocks need to be somewhere near the things saying that we don't want long blocks.
Show of hands for pulling this for further review discussion. Next item, Judith.
Okay, that mid-block passageway, that's the issue. And this refers to where in the design section these things also appear. When I looked at that draft of the updated design section, my problem was that they did not appear together, not that they were there.
Show of hands for pulling this item for further discussion. Not seeing any. Next item on your list, Judith.
Again, I think that the street furniture things, that was a gateway-related code for the plan area. I think that street furniture code should be appropriate to the specific locations where it will be applied.
Commissioners that want to pull this for discussion, show of hands. Any hands? No hands? Next item, Judith.
Okay, appropriate to neighborhood design is not something that's going to give us objective standards, and so this may actually be a throwaway. Building placement, again, refers to sidewalks. I think what we're talking about is site design, and I think that if we're talking about sidewalks, we need to address the issue of our lack of sidewalks. And those are minor. The choice of benefits issue is much more significant. What this, in effect, is doing is getting rid of those categories, I believe. David, is this the statement that might have referred to categories, but as it moved into the general plan, dropped the categories as you dropped it for the gateway?
This is verbatim what's in the current draft of the gateway. And I think the idea here was to, create a program. Again, this is under the new conglomerated, which we've now pulled some of the pieces apart, but the conglomerated body of community benefits policies in the design element, the new D8 policies, and the first policy is to allow for a range of community amenities that we allow the developers to select.
Okay, and currently it would only apply in the gateway, but this would be one of those bits of sleeper language that would apply when community benefits programs are adopted elsewhere. I think we should say that.
It would allow for it to apply, and so right now we have a specific set of. Right now, all of the D8 policies are reflected in the Gateway Community Benefit Program, but there's nothing to say that in the future, if, for instance, D8D, owner-occupied affordable housing as a community amenity, was the only thing that you wanted to apply into a new community benefits program, then you could identify that through the triggers that are created to activate community benefits. And so it's not necessary. The Gateway currently has all of these because we've used the Gateway program to develop, or planning to develop this program, but it doesn't require that a community benefit program, use all of these policies. And so,
would it be possible to change the language of this so that it says
everything's
something
possible.
like, at present, this applies to the Gateway, in the future, it may apply to other community benefits areas?
I would not advise that.
I want to see a show of hands. Commissioners want to discuss this item further, because if not, then I'd like to move on.
I feel like we already have discussed this item, I mean, in the broader sense.
Okay, let's hear the next item, Judith. And I do just want to remind everyone that we're ticking past 7:30 and still have other stuff on our agenda, so I'm trying to be mindful of that. I think we're almost done your list.
These are just the design policies, so let me sort by.
I think there was a CM5D, a new policy, and CM5C, 8K, bike infrastructure and curb extensions.
That was 5B as in boy.
5C. Which was referred to as 8K bike infrastructure. Consider locations for public outdoor bike racks coordinated with public transit stops accessible in the public right-of-way. I think in the Gateway, that should have much stronger language than just consider. I think that.
Okay. Other commissioners that would like to pull this item for discussion?
I would suggest designate.
Not seeing that. Let's go on. Okay.
I'll support designating more bike lockers.
Yeah. I'd support changing consider to designate. That would be fine.
And that may actually be an implementation measure, possibly for the gateway. Therefore, keeping it in the gateway with an implementation measure.
Can we get to your next item, Judith?
CM5D 7H4 curb extensions in all new roadways. I would be fine with that. I would get rid of all new roadways because there may be places where that may not be appropriate. In fact, there may even be roadways without curbs, as in possible designated Wohnort, which typically don't have curbs, as well as a number of other residential or campus-like areas.
Other commissioners that would like to discuss this item further?
You
Not
can
seeing
just,
any.
you can just
How
say
about-
yes.
How about adding other design features to that?
To increase pedestrian visibility and safety?
Mm-hmm.
I like
That sounds good.
Looks like broad support. Let's get on to your next item.
So this was kind of confusing. This was material that you wanted to add to the general plan, but that wasn't in the gateway. I was confused about what you wanted here.
This is policy GA7B 14. I believe they were lettered before, and so it was in, 7B in. I changed them to numbers because it grates on me to have two letters consecutively, but, so this is 7B in. I apologize, I should have mentioned that.
Okay, so it's just where it's designated, right? Okay, I was just really confused by what's this doing
Sorry.
here? Okay, the next one below that seems that this is gateway specific, but maybe you had something else in mind that I was missing.
No, I think this should be, in, the plan area should have been stricken, and probably just provide sidewalks or multimodal trails on both sides of all streets, as sort of an objective citywide to create complete streets.
Okay, so that's a policy. Will it have an implementation measure? Because it does kind of seem like in our
I think the complete streets is the implementation measure. I think this supports complete streets.
okay, but we still do have many streets that are never going to be wide enough for sidewalks and multimodal trails on both sides of those streets. And so I think that maybe we get into trouble with this one.
Yeah, I mean, this is the design goal in particular for, newly developing areas, where we have this, guidance that when you're building out a new project, we want you to make sure that it has complete streets.
Can you
If you wanna
specify
soften-
that?
Excuse me?
Can you specify for new construction? Because I think on existing streets.
I think this allows the city, though, to go and do this in areas that have existing streets as well. So if you wanted to tone this down, I mean, I think it's fine the way it is, but
I'd like to hear if
put
other,
strive for.
I'd like to hear other commissioners.
I don't want to tone this down. I want it to go as far as it can. And I realize that lots of places will be grandfathered in and don't have sidewalks right now.
Abby, you're looking like you're agreeing with that.
I'm okay with these.
Okay, let's move on to the next. And how many, can we just have a quick check? How many more items do we have?
2, 3, 3, 4,
Because I'm
5,
trying to
6.
manage time effectively.
I'm seeing 6, and I'm not sure that we caught every single one. We try to do our best to catch all of the
Okay,
items listed.
let's hear your next one. Judith, please.
I'm trying to remember why I caught that one. On this one, what is tandem mobility bike share?
It's a specific company. I mean, if you wanted to strike these specific companies, I think it just
I
gives a
would like
sense
to
for.
get rid of all specific company references anywhere in the plan. And I think it might make sense to just stop with that first sentence because it doesn't preclude the rest of it. And over 20 years, the types of opportunities are guaranteed to change.
I like that change. Is that where we're at?
Okay, thumbs up, moving on.
Okay, so the no net loss in class 1 trail system. I can't remember why.
Then let's move on to your next one, if
focused on
nothing's
that.
jumping out at you.
Okay. Widen sidewalks, this policy would move it out of the gateway into the broader plan, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I think that we probably need stronger language in the gateway for our sidewalks, so I think it should come back into the gateway to trigger some design standards.
Other
And-
commissioners
and-
that,
And then also be in the citywide plan. I don't think we should take anything out of the gateway.
This already has specific implementation in the Gateway Code, and it can rely on, that implementation can rely on its CM5F additional policy to support it, so.
other commissioners concerned? or-
I was just going to say, we've already looked at the code and it already has a layout of the sidewalk requirements. and-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next item. Judith, please.
Okay, in the gateway, we've specifically targeted that area for car-free lifestyles. If we apply that to the entire city, we're basically putting a priority on some areas of the city over others. And I think that because that is one of the very distinctive aspects of the gateway, whether it appears elsewhere in the plan or not, I think we need to have it in the gateway as well.
Other commissioners that wanna-
I'm not sure what your intention here was.
Other commissioners that want to discuss this item further?
I absolutely think we should be doing this sort of planning for the entire city and not just the gateway area, right? People should be able to live in Arcata without a car.
But is your proposal here, David, would that take this language out of the gateway plan, and would it take that policy out of the gateway plan?
Yeah, but it would still apply in the Gateway.
Okay, I think it needs to be in the gateway too, because that's one of the most distinctive features and rationales for that plan.
Well, we've discussed that a lot, and we would all agree. Is it not specific also to the gate? Will this show up if somebody's just reading the gateway plan?
Well, no, not if they just read the Gateway Plan, they won't key into this, but the Gateway Plan is implemented through a zoning code that uses this, regardless of where it lands in the general plan, it uses this policy to establish the kinds of standards that are required for the Gateway Plan. So I don't see the harm in having it in the circulation mobility. And I definitely don't think it needs to be duplicated. It could be cross-referenced, I guess, if it absolutely had to be. But the general assumption is that unless there's a conflict with the gateway policies, or that the policy in the general plan doesn't apply, then it does apply in the gateway.
So concerns with this, or people comfortable with where it is? Raise of hands if you want to discuss or change further. Okay, moving on. Next item, Judith.
This policy, CM5D 7H1, safe and attractive pedestrian facilities, connect the plan area to the downtown. This is gateway specific. It needs to be in the gateway, or it needs to refer to the gateway if it's only going to be in the general plan, but I can't see it being deleted from the gateway. That's an editing thing, I think,
Yeah, we could
more
do-
than anything else.
Yeah, we could do it either way. Yeah, I didn't catch all the editings. I can see how this could be, as written, obviously, it's referring to the gateway area. There may be other areas that, also we should
Okay,
have.
the
safe and
following item as well is the way it's written now, is gateway specific.
Well, so I guess just as a question, would we not want a policy saying connect the city to the downtown Plaza core area with safe and attractive pedestrian-friendly walking routes? Maybe cut out that last little bit.
Yeah, like where would we not want that?
Yeah.
So,
And it really, a little broader, though, it shouldn't just be to the downtown plaza area, it should be from one area to the other throughout the city.
I guess if everywhere connects to the plaza, it'll be like a hub with spokes.
Rome.
right?
Hopefully, yeah.
So this item and the following item are both about connectivity, and they are both quite general. Those were among the things that, should be edited so that they are general. It's a language change as much as anything else, but it's an important one.
So a little editing, is that,
staff comfortable with wording changes to that effect?
Yeah, I wanted to make a note too, just to be clear. I found a few areas in here that say plan area still. Obviously, we're going to be going through and editing this. This was something that we did fairly quickly. We will be
Got it.
removing plan area where it needs to be removed from any of these spots.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Next item, then, Judith?
Let me just confirm, are you comfortable, comfortable with these couple of changes that I've made? Plan area, city to the downtown, and instead of plan area, various neighborhoods are connected.
Sounds good. Next item, Judith?
Are we back up at parking lots, or did we address that already?
I think we already got that.
Okay, so we're at LU1U add. Require residential uses for bonus tiers to promote housing production, limit participation in community benefits program to projects that include a minimum standard of residential units. And again, this was a gateway specific policy. We don't have plans for those other areas yet, and I think it's premature. In fact, this and the following policy, and that they should go back into the gateway plan.
Matt?
I can't imagine a community benefits program anywhere in the city that doesn't have a minimum standard of residential units. And so it's hard for me to imagine where we wouldn't want this policy to apply.
Right. Any other commissioners need to change this or pull it? Okay. Is that I think that's the last one on your list. Thank you very much, Judith. And then Joel, I'm not sure if in the scope of that we got to GA7D.
I think David said that was one of the ones that
Part of the
staff
gateway.
had revised and had shown briefly. I didn't have enough time to process when he, in his introductory remarks, went through that one.
It's the parking minimums, parking maximums one. 7D?
7D, as in dog.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I didn't hear what the point was about this particular one, but this is one of the staff ones that we should definitely look at to make sure folks are comfortable with those changes. And we'll start with that one.
Are we reading all of the yellow stuff or just
7D right now.
7D? Okay.
Yeah, and this was the added language, and Commissioner Yodowitz, I'm not sure what your point was that you pulled it for. I missed that.
There was one that had to do with parking standards. I think the former.
7C.
Is there a pitch?
I just would like to, the language regarding hotels and other regional draws, I wonder whether we should impose a parking maximum for those. For example, hotels, this is just leaving it totally discretionary and open-ended. And I might suggest that, at least for hotels, you wouldn't want to have, I don't know what the existing parking requirement is, but, do you want more than one parking space per room? And on the other employment centers, whatever, I don't know what that is, but I would like to know what the existing parking requirements are for those uses.
Show of hands for wanting to pull this for discussion or otherwise comfortable as is. Judith?
Sorry, Joel, is the question whether or not we should limit the amount of parking that these other users can provide?
Yeah, I would like to see some maximums for those particular uses. I agree with eliminating parking minimums. David's comment was let the market decide on parking for these other uses, hotels and other regional draws. But I think we should have a policy guidance as to maximum for these other uses.
I guess I have a staff question, which is, if you kept parking maximums for all business types, you could still set different parking maximums for different business types, right? And so say, could be more lenient with a hotel than with another type of business?
Yeah, you absolutely could. And there's also a provision for if someone feels like they need more parking than the maximum, there's a process for that as well. So yeah, I'm agnostic on that change.
David, wouldn't a new hotel come under, that would come before the commission, right?
This is in
For
the
review?
This is in the gateway area, and there are certain, for the most part, the trigger for a ministerial review is that it has some, housing. I know we've had some discussion, I don't remember off the top of my head if we actually codified this, but we've had some discussion about allowing a hotel to site ministerially as well, even though it doesn't provide housing. So if a hotel came in, it would not. For other, types of uses, they would come before the commission if there was not a housing component.
Go ahead, Judith.
So a hotel or a regional draw that does include a housing component of some sort would then, under this language, not be subject to a parking maximum or could be subject to a parking maximum?
You would have to change the language to establish a parking maximum, so I think that's the discussion on the floor.
Okay, because
Regardless of-
I can see how the market would allow a hotel with no parking maximum to basically become a parking lot provider, which could be a very good, profitable decision depending on the location. And I think that's probably what we don't want. So I'd like to have some specific language about the discretionary possibilities in established parking maximums if we're going to have this item in the general plan rather than in the gateway.
Go ahead, Matt.
We never really took a vote on whether or not to discuss this, but since we are, I think we should add parking maximums back into hotels and we can set them at a different rate than other types of uses. That'll be a follow-up discussion, but I don't think we should rule out the concept of a parking maximum at this stage.
So do we want to adjust this and get into this conversation further, or are we
Well, can we
comfortable?
just make reference to there being parking maximums? Well, we're not going to figure that out right now. That's what you're saying, right? So just see table, see,
If you want to establish parking maximums, I would delete the text that's highlighted right here, starting with foremost land uses.
Everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
Majority anyways? Let's do that. Okay, and then, David, are we all the way up to air quality now?
Are we up to air quality?
As far as we've gotten through everything we need to.
I believe so.
We got through everything that was pulled,
Let's see.
so we should be ready to discuss Peter's air quality question and take public comment.
Yep.
Although giving the time, I think we're going to kick the annual report discussion to the 9th at this point.
and the design.
Excuse me, I'm not sure we're done with that, that idea of the overlay as the tool to implement either the gateway or any other infill opportunity zone. We really never made any decision on that aspect of your staff report.
I mean, we took it as a commission that we were either going to vote for it, which meant we were not fine with it and wanted to discuss it, and the majority, to my recollection, was fine with that language as it is. So I disagree. Matt?
I think there was an extent to which that discussion sort of jumped ahead of the discussion we just had of what policies we want to keep in the gateway and what policies we want to make the general plan. But considering the fact that we have just made most of the gateway policies general policies, and there are now, I think, far fewer policies remaining in the gateway, having it be an overlay zone makes perfect sense to me because it's a skinnier zone than it once was.
I mean, I think that's how it was resolved by the conversation about porting gateway issues into the wider general
Yeah,
plan.
I guess I'm just saying we've now reaffirmed that with the policy discussion we've had.
Does everyone agree with that and comfortable with that conclusion? Okay. So, air quality. Peter, I know you've been patient and waiting for this for a long time, so we're going to continue to use the framework because I do want to make sure we have time for public comment. So maybe give everyone just a minute to read through your suggested changes to the air quality element. Okay. So everyone had a chance to read suggested language. for or against Peter's suggested language, or comments or questions? Where are people at with this? Matt, looks like you got something on your mind.
I'm strongly in favor of it. I'm very curious how the city council will react to it, but I think, as someone who cares deeply about air quality and climate change, I think it's a good policy.
Got it. Joel?
I'm supportive, other than it reads like an ordinance, and I would, can we say something like, instead of is banned, shall not be utilized, or something that doesn't sound like we're creating we're creating the ordinance?
I'm fine with changing the language, but what I'm trying to say is we should not allow wood-burning appliances going forward, period. So I don't know what you want to replace the word banned with, but the sentiment
Judith?
is banned.
Where do you land on this, Judith?
I'm actually okay with the policy AQ1B, and I think banning wood-burning appliances in remodeling has some extremely serious equity considerations and emergency considerations in Arcata, with power outages and our existing policy to discourage more gas-powered appliances to electrify. I know there have been weeks when the only heat I had access to in my house was a wood-burning stove, and if I hadn't had the ability to use that, and it was in an addition, so it was remodeling, I would have had to move out of my house during those periods. And I know that there are people with far fewer resources than I have who were probably in the same position. And so I think an absolute ban on wood-burning appliances in remodeling in particular it is not something that's going to serve many people in Arcata, and especially some of our most vulnerable residents.
Got it. Thank you. Abby, where do you land on this?
I'm also in favor of removing the reference to remodeling. And then, I mean, the word banned, that's fine, or shall be prohibited in any new construction works too. I mean, how often is anything banned in our code currently? If that's not a word that's typically used, maybe shall be prohibited.
Dan?
I am all for this, and I'm also wondering if and when the city of Arcata or the region or the state of California is going to ban gas-fired appliances. I know the state of Washington just passed a law to require heat pumps in all new construction. So this is coming, and wood burning, I think, is an atrocious. I have a neighbor that burns a lot of wood, and I hate it. I hate breathing his toxic wood. And it's not cheap. There's nothing affordable about burning wood these days. If we're looking dollar for dollar, unless you have your own forest or whatever, you're cutting your own. But it's a very expensive and emitting outdated method of heat.
Poison.
So, Joel, you're comfortable, but
Yeah, I would just, I'm entirely supportive of this in concept. My question is the language.
the ban
Can we
part.
say is banned? Is that appropriate for the planning commission?
I hear concern, Abby, about the remodeling portion as well, and I'm just curious, do we need to amend the language here to remove the remodeling part? My concern is that it just really limits the impact of this if we take remodeling off the table, concerns notwithstanding. Go ahead, Peter.
I agree, it does. And what I'm trying to say is that in any change in the city, new or remodeling, we don't put in wood heat because it's inefficient and it poisons the air.
I support this, including remodeling, and am fine if we want to say is prohibit or something other than ban, but I support it in general. Sounds like, Dan, you do as well?
Yeah, I do as well, and it takes a building permit to install wood heat, whether it's new construction or remodel. So if they're just not permittable any longer, however the language reads, it has the same impact, the same effect.
Right.
I'd accept Abby's suggestion, shall be prohibited.
So that sounds like we have a majority in support of that as written, but maybe banned could be changed to something that feels less onerous or something.
Yep, couple comments from staff. The direction is duly noted. We'll make the change. Obviously pending our legal counsel's review of the matter to make sure that we have the authority to be able to do that. And I, do think, I at least want to consult with, my colleagues in ES and see if they have, a committee that wants to take this up. They're, in addition to the potential equity questions that I think are legitimate. I understand I'm hearing this commission saying that, despite those, it's more important to shift fuels. But I do think that those are legitimate concerns. The other concern that I think there may be is the idea that folks who have outdated wood stoves are not going to replace them at all. They're not going to replace them with new forms of heat. They're just going to keep their outdated, polluting stove. And so to the extent that that's an issue, I don't know. I don't know how many there are in Arcata that are in that condition. I know when I took my wood stove out, part of the reason we did it is because it affected the indoor air quality. It was so, terrible. But I think if I was, in a position in particular at that time of, having to, put in a, completely new system, that was going to cost significantly more, I may have just kept the wood stove I had. So.
Well, we'll look for then further feedback from staff, but consider that passed, and thank you for that,
But the
Peter.
city's never going to go tell somebody they have to take out a wood stove. That's not in this. We're talking new construction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, but still, if they're asking in a remodel to put a new one, you'd say, sorry, you can't get a permit for that. It's no longer allowed.
Yeah.
If they have one in their other part of their house or something, you're not going to say, and you have to take that out.
Yeah, what I'm suggesting is if they have one in another part of their house and it's failing, they may continue to use that failing wood stove as opposed to.
Well, the better is the enemy of the good, right? This is progress in the right. There's always going to be loopholes or considerations or situations in which we're not getting everything we want, but surely this will improve the general situation from an air quality perspective. Judith, did you have a
Yeah, I think
quick comment?
if we're going to adopt the stronger language of this, including remodeling, without presumably the references to gas-fired appliances, which apparently in other policies we're trying to phase out, it should be accompanied with a policy to provide adequate warming facilities for people who may need them under emergency and other cold weather conditions, and that would be in the safety element to the general plan.
We'll look for staff to come back with recommendations after talking to city attorney and the other departments that could include those kind of concerns. Okay, I appreciate everyone's work. That was a lot, and we all stayed together. I really, really appreciate everyone's work this evening. I would like to turn now to public comment. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. Please feel free to state your name for the record, and may we have the first speaker, please?
Hello, Commissioners. Glenn Caldwell. I have a house on Western Avenue in the Sunset. I'm going to cede most of my time to Fred Weiss, but I did want to just make a couple of comments on the air quality portion. I was the manager.
I'm sorry, Glenn.
Can't do it?
Well, you either cede your time or.
Okay. Ceding my time to Fred.
Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioners. I need to be quick because I've got a lot here. I am not against putting many policies that were developed during the Gateway Area Plan process, but not as many as we've seen here tonight. You're using a framework system, but I don't see evidence that all the commissioners did their homework. We had the framework before, we had written comments in advance, not tonight. The negative polling, I feel, is completely inappropriate for this. It implies that all 7 commissioners are familiar with all the items. We could have used gradients of agreement. That was not done. It didn't. Only 3 commissioners brought up policies tonight. Commissioner Lehman, this is not a critique of you, but you brought up a policy at a previous meeting that you didn't bring up tonight. I'll get into that in a minute. In my opinion, there should have been a side-by-side spreadsheet that showed the general plan policies versus the gateway area policies so that the actual language could be seen. Language is important, as Commissioner Lehman pointed out. The question, you're considering the form-based code as complete at this time. There's 26 policies that were marked for deletion as not being necessary anymore. I disagree that all these should be deleted. One of them is 3A. It says new units planned for approximately 500 new units, recognizing the full build-out potential is close to 33,500 units. That has been eliminated. That affects the EIR, seems to me. It's not there anymore. As an aside, the city attorney gave a very good Brown Act presentation. It's on Arcata1.com. It's an hour and 10-minute video. The problem, when he talked about violation of the Brown Act, he said the problem is damage to the reputation of the council or commission and a public perception issue. Questions about the overlay. Is this folding the entire gateway plan into the general plan? Could we get a clarification on what this overlay is this evening? And I want to know with 100% certainty whether the gateway area plan will be voted on by 3 or 5 city council members, as has been the case for 2 years. Some small items, Commissioner Tagney, you mentioned one of your items is that there's non-specific or vague. This is the case with many other items, many other policies, I feel. Commissioner Mayer's comments about trying out the community benefits, that it shouldn't be a background or sleeper item. I completely agree with that. The triggers that would activate it are actually quite small. It could be done easily by you're a good planning commission, but a future planning commission could do it very easily, like in 15 minutes. Commissioner Lehman, you brought up the policy on the study session for language issues. When a policy is similar to another policy, they have to be looked at closely. You pointed that out. I'll point this out. There's a policy 9F about solar shading. In the gateway plan, it says ensure new development minimizes solar shading. In the general plan, it says consider shading of adjacent structures. Very different language. One is ensure, the other is consider. The bike lockers, we covered that tonight. It said consider, and you changed it to designate. Again, different language. By not going through all of them, I think you're missing out. The number of actual errors in these tables indicated that it hadn't been gone through thoroughly or vetted for details, and details make the difference. There's over 24 cases where it says the plan, or referring to the gateway plan. Of course, they'll be eliminated, but I think we could have gotten a better, more detailed assortment here. I'll mention 9G, transition to lower intensity uses. It says incorporate massing strategies to minimize impacts on adjacent uses. You covered that tonight. I don't think that you're following that policy in the form-based code, and a lot of other people in the community feel that way also. I sent you a letter that's I know is long, but I'd like you to read it. I try to make the points easy. There's a lot of language I think can be cleaned up. As I say, is either vague or doesn't really mean what I think the commission wants to say. We're not going to get to community benefits tonight as an item, but I'll mention we had a September 25th meeting with the public, community benefits. None of that is being considered in the community benefits program as we see now. The number one item that they talked was owner-occupied affordable housing. Number two, 100% affordable projects. Number three, owner-occupied market rate housing. We'll go about more on that when we do get to that. Thanks for your work. I know I'm critical, but I appreciate what you're trying to do here.
Appreciate you. Thanks for your comments, Fred. Do we have any commenters online, David?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Good evening, Commissioners. The City Council did not agree to a large sweep of gateway policies into the general plan, but quite the opposite. I feel the Planning Commission is not heeding this guidance, which was asking for a very selective review of policies that might be applicable to the city at large. For the council to have to reiterate to the commission the gateway policies are for the gateway and not for the city at large would be unfortunate. I would recommend that any commissioner who did not watch the council deliberations or read the minutes on this matter do so. The date of the meeting was November 15th. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
That's all we have online.
Okay, then we are on to communications. Are there any communications from commissioners? Joel?
Assuming our next meeting is the 9th of January, is that
That's correct.
correct? Yeah, I will miss that meeting.
Got it. Thank you for that notice.
I just wanted to point out to the chair that there is item B, and you do have to address the annual report, open it as an item, even though I think
That's right.
you're inclined to.
Yeah, I mentioned briefly, but I suppose formally I want to just move that to January 9th.
Okay, and related to that, we'll move the presentation to the 17th.
Thank you. Any correspondence or communications from staff?
I don't think I have anything.
There being
Actually, I'm sorry, I do. On next Monday, this Monday coming up, starting at 4 o'clock, we have a scoping meeting to evaluate potential studies the city would do for any environmental impacts associated with the local coastal program. And I just wanted to let people know that. It's primarily for public and agencies to come and discuss the local coastal program and make recommendations to the Coastal Commission, who ultimately will make the decision about what environmental studies we need to do for their program.
So in the past, we've been discouraged from attending these sorts of events because if enough of us do, we will, have a quorum. Is that still hold up for this?
That does. This is subject matter that's under the Planning Commission's purview, and so if the majority of you show up, then it becomes an unnoticed meeting, and that's a Brown Act violation.
Judith?
Will that meeting be on Zoom, and could we attend without speaking, without running into that issue on Zoom?
You can't really. It's not going to be broadcast on Zoom either, but that doesn't absolve you from having a quorum issued necessarily.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for everyone's work, and there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.